Hello everybody, my name is Neus and I'm a first year PhD student here at Aston University, and today I'll be talking about the proposal for my PhD project in which I am to investigate discursive constructions of sexual consent across the so-called manosphere using corpus approaches. As I said, this is just a proposal. I've started my PhD less than a month ago, so please bear with me if some aspects of what I'm about to talk about are quite vague. And before moving on to the actual presentation, I'd like to warn you that I've included a slide with some sensitive data, so please be aware of that and skip the slide in case you feel it can affect your mental well-being. So let me start by answering the question, why should we focus on sexual consent? Just by looking at recent statistics, one can acknowledge the fact that sexual offenses still constitute a major social issue despite decades of research, activism, and legal reforms. And coming from a forensic linguistics background in which I'm interested in the relationship between language and law, generally speaking, I feel the concept of sexual consent has been largely understudied. If we look at the current legislation on sexual offences across different jurisdictions, it seems to be the case that the concept of consent is the key evidential aspect in legal proceedings, namely the innocence or guilt of somebody accused of a sexual offence will essentially depend on whether all the participants in the disputed event actually consented to the sexual activity. The concept of consent is complex enough, but if we also consider the fact that in most of the cases just the participants' verbal accounts of the disputed events are the only evidence in such legal proceedings, then we have another layer of complexity, and as this is when subjective understandings of the notion presented discursively emerge. And although existing research tackles the issue of consent from different perspectives, mostly legal, psychological, social, and linguistic within the legal system, there is still lack of linguistic research on how sexual consent is negotiated and understood in everyday contexts. But what's more, what about contexts in which certain practices and views of consent are not only discussed innocently, but also sort of encouraged and promoted? And this brings me to the so-called manosphere. This term essentially refers to a collection of primarily online communities whose agenda revolve around self-identified masculinity issues, and members of these communities tend to portray their male identity as under attack and in need for defense, which in turn functions as a form of legitimation for violence against any threat to what they consider their men's rights, which essentially is related to feminism and women more generally. The manosphere is composed by different groups: pickup artists, incels, men going their own way, men's rights movements, and again, as part of their agenda, they discuss relationships with women, especially sexual relationships, and encourage and promote certain behaviors, which I think are worth exploring. Because this encouragement and promotion mainly happens in online fora, that's what I plan to be focused on my research and use posts in these online fora as sources of data. But then, which communities would be worth studying in relation to sexual consent, and which online fora particularly? Some recent research has connected some of these online communities to the promotion of sexual violence towards women. For instance, Wright's paper published last year discusses the term last-minute resistance in a pickup artist forum. To give you a little bit of context, pickup artist's primary goal is to seduce and sleep with as many women as possible, And to do that, they apply self-identified techniques and strategies. And one of them is overcoming last-minute resistance to sex presented by women, which I think presents a unique opportunity to investigate how they reconcile this particular strategy with modern understandings of sexual consent, namely no means no. Other work on the incel subculture, typically associated with hostility towards women and men who are sexually active, has been also connected with explicit promotions of sexual violence towards women, more particularly rape. So essentially, with this research project, I aim to describe how members of these communities linguistically and discursively construct the notion of consent and which behaviors, verbal or non-verbal, allow to infer consent and also non-consent, as well as shedding some light on the underpinning gendered assumptions behind these understandings of consent that legitimize particular sexual practices. So to give you an idea of how the data I aim to analyze may look like, I have included some posts found in pickup artists and incel fora I came across when developing my PhD proposal. I would strongly encourage you to stop the video for a few seconds so you can take a proper look at it. And some of them reproduce rape myths, while others give contextualized environments to particular sexual intercourse, highlighting behavioral responses to the detriment of verbal responses. So yeah, I would encourage you to stop the video now and take a look at the posts. As you may have noticed, the content of the post varies quite a lot, which reflects the vague nature of the manosphere and certainly brings issues to the process of corpus construction. For instance, apart from pickup artist fora, members of other communities do not solely engage in conversations about sexual practices with women, which may make it difficult to find enough relevant data in some fora from other communities and may require manual scrutiny regarding which posts to actually analyze after scraping a particular site. At this stage, I have more questions than answers in this regard and how to design the corpus analysis, but for now, the plan is that once the particular sources of data are chosen, so the plan is to take advantage of previous research which has identified relevant key terms within these communities and treat them as points of entry to the data. But then also, as my own analysis progresses, if any salient patterns emerge from that analysis, also treat those linguistic features as point of entry to the data. And additionally, since I also want to look at the gendered assumptions or ideologies that underpin those understandings of sexual consent, I will also rely on feminist critical discourse analysis to reveal those and provide a meaningful explanation to the results, which will have previously emerged from the corpus approach. These are the references I used in the presentation. And that's all from me. Thank you so much for listening to this video, and looking forward to your comments, suggestions, questions, especially if you have some feedback or comments regarding how to go about the corpus approach, would be highly appreciated. And here in the slide, you also have my contact details in case you would like to have them and contact me personally. And again, thank you so much.